Okay, Maylin, any questions?
Yeah, I actually wanted to shift to what you see as a longer-term solution response to the place that we're at now, the gridlock of knowledge and beliefs. You said that there's a left brain thinking where we're basing on facts, and then our right brain emotional response. But that's not all. There's this third thing. Can we have the slide? Insight.
Yes.
And that insight is something where you tell a story about, in your book, about this fellow firefighter, Coldwag Judge. Tell us that story.
In 1949, 16 smoke jumpers were called out to a fire in Man Gulch in Montana.
I think, yes, here we go.
Mm-hmm. And it was one of the worst forest fire disasters in the country's history because out of the 16, 13 perished. Mm-hmm. Wag Dodge was the captain of the 16, and they jumped into the Man Gulch. It was a pretty traditional fire, but literally minutes after they landed, the wind shifted and they became trapped. Yes. All the firefighters became trapped between the fire and a very, very steep canyon. Yeah. The firefighters, Wag immediately told them to drop their equipment and to run, and they started to try to scale the canyon, but he saw that the fire was moving at about 700 feet per minute and that they were not going to be able to outrun the fire. So in a moment of complete insanity, this is 1949, he turned around and started running toward the fire and lighting the grass on the ground, and they thought he had lost his mind, and he ordered his crew to do the same. He doesn't know, later he was interviewed, he had no idea why he did this. But he lit the ground around him, and then he grabbed a handkerchief, wet it, and pulled his firefighting equipment, jacket over him and allowed the inferno to pass over him. It was the first time that a firefighter had built a safety zone by burning the fuel around the area, and he survived the fire. And two others that found some cracks in the canyons and hid there that were very badly harmed, they survived as well. But 13 smoke jumpers died that day. Later, Wag Dodge was asked, what made you think to burn the fuel around you? He was a very ordinary man. He was a volunteer firefighter. He had no history of having these insights. But when you think about insights, they're the thing of folklore. Newton had an apple dropped on his head. Archimedes got into a tub and watched the water spill over the sides and discovered displacement theory. Now, for the first time in human history, we can put skull caps on humans and give them increasingly complex problems. So the first thing we do is we wind up using our left side of our brain and use logic and deconstruction. And sometimes we use the synthesis of the right side of the brain. But as the problems become more and more complex and there's more variables and the variables are acting dynamically, at some point the left and the right sides of our brain, the kinds of problem solving we are capable of doing there, it just peters out. We hit a ceiling. Every now and then, spontaneously, a little part of our brain called the ASTG lights up like a Christmas tree. 300 milliseconds before we're going to connect information we have in a novel way in which we've never done it before and have a breakthrough. And when everyone knows in science, when you get to a point where you can predict a behavior and you know a person's going to have a breakthrough, you are on to something. So we know there is a third form of problem solving, and every human being can be observed to have this regardless of their educational background. So this is something organic inside the human body, and we just don't have control over it. I'd like to have insights every day of my life. I'd like to induce them. But we just don't know how to do that.
So I'm seeing something that's almost like the point where people said everybody needs to learn to read and write. You're sort of saying that for the complexity, everybody needs to cultivate this skill of insight. And what is the way that we can educate people or help us develop more insight more regularly when it's needed at this difficult time?
Well, there's a third of my book, as you know, is devoted to what we know about insight. And people say, well, you didn't tell us enough. Well, it's a nonfiction book. I can't make things up that we don't know yet. This is breaking neuroscience. So I have to make that disclaimer first. But one of the things that we do know is that you can't connect data you don't have.
Yes.
So it's very important that you have as much content as possible. I'm not going to come up with some breakthrough in physics if I've never cracked open a physics book. So it's not a miracle.
Yeah.
So the more content you have, the more likely you can make these novel connections. So the trick is, how can you load content quickly? And when we find that neuroscientists are developing these brain fitness tools, and I'm not talking about the gaming company tools, but I am talking about brain fitness tools developed by neuroscientists that allow us to load and retain content at a much faster rate. And we feel that that will be the breakthrough as we move forward.
Okay. Earlier on, we were talking about other ways to cultivate insight, where, for example, in investment, some people are amazingly insightful about being like George Soros, making a killing on the exchange rate. But there are other examples of investors who have developed that insight. And you said women who had got together in the Midwest.
Collaboration.
Yeah.
You know, in the face of complexity, where you have, one of the definitions of complexity that came out of Harvard is there are more wrong choices than there are right ones, and the wrong ones are exponentially growing. So you become an incompetent picker. Yeah. So one of the things that you have to realize is when you collaborate, you have a better chance of selecting the right investments. So these groups that are getting together in the Midwest and in New York, and their investment groups, and they're sharing information, they tend to do very, very well. Another thing is, if you know you're in a high failure rate, then you have to use a model for high failure rate.
Yeah.
And so you want to go to things like venture capital models. If you know you're trying to solve a problem like the Gulf oil spill, for example, and you know there's a great sense of urgency, you cannot get a bunch of smart people in a room and decide this is the solution and we're going to pick it. Look what happened. The first solution we came up with is drop a concrete box on the hole. And 30 days later, we found out that didn't work. Then we went into the next solution, which was we were going to drill from the side and relieve some of the pressure in oil. 30 days later, we found out that didn't work. That is the most ridiculous way to go about solving a problem that has a sense of urgency. When you become an incompetent picker because there are more wrong solutions than there are right ones, you must go at it like a venture capitalist does, who knows that no amount of due diligence is going to allow him to pick the winners more than 15% of the time. So they invest in 100 companies, and 15 strike gold, and 85 don't get second and third and fourth round funding.
So,
Rebecca, is inspiration something natural? I mean, do people have to work to be inspired, which I think is the same thing as insight, or is it a natural function, but most people have too much static going on inside their brains to hear the inspiration?
We know that a certain amount of quiet time is required. We know that you need a large amount of content. We know that blood flow to the brain, exercise, helps insight. We even know that walking on uneven surfaces helps you think better.
So any kind of stimulation, anything that's different, gives you a little
the reason uneven surfaces works is because fundamentally that's why we've got the prefrontal cortex, is it developed when we became bipedal. So when we're walking on uneven surfaces, we're really exercising the brain. The brain wants to be warmed up. It's just like a marathon runner stretching and hydrating and doing things to prepare to do something difficult. Insight is a cognitively very, very pricey exercise. It's almost as though we see areas of the brain shutting down, getting ready, preparing to use this third form of problem solving. There's all kinds of indication that we are not evolved enough to be able to use it every day.
Now, I'd love to ask you a lot more questions, but I've just got the signal that we're just about out of time. So we are going to have to wrap the show. I'd like to thank our guest, Rebecca Costa, sociobiologist and author of the highly acclaimed book, The Watchman's Rattle, Thinking Our Way Out of Extinction, and Mei-Lin Feng, co-host, co-producer of this program. Thank you for watching. Visit our website, www.futuretalk.net. I'm Marty Wasserman. We'll see you next time.
bye.